The other thing that we're trying to do too, and even working with NCMA on this a little bit, is get government and industry talking.
Yes.
Right. Let's have honest conversations about these things. And, when we do that, you tend to have a little bit of holdback from industry because of their government customers. But let's have the open dialogue. Let's talk about the pain points. Let's talk about the things we're struggling with and see if government can't help us.
Okay, good morning, Giacomo. How are you today?
Doing well, Randie. It's good to see you as always.
Good to see you again. And thank you again for being on our podcast today. Again, the series that we're doing with accountants and attorneys. And so I'm excited to have you. And as you share with our audience, all of your experience, not all, but your experiences, your expertise with them. And so today, audience, we have Giacomo Apadula with us, and he is with RSM. So Giacomo is a principal at RSM. He's the national leader for government contract consulting, who specializes in government contract and grant administration, specifically cost accounting, regulatory compliance, and business process improvements and system design. So specifically, Giacomo serves clients with the government, whether they are for-profit or nonprofit, and the business sectors that they specifically work in, again, is compliance and cost accounting. So today we're going to get to learn a little bit about what Giacomo does. And then a little bit about RSM is that they are an assurance company that deals with tax and consulting services for specifically middle market leaders or middle market contractors or companies. And so I really appreciate learning a little bit more about middle market. And we know that our small businesses have a lot of perks per se, right? And then you've got the middle market, sometimes that kind of find themselves in limbo a little bit. But before we jump into that, Giacomo, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you even came to get into accounting, and then even more specifically, why Govcon?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. I'm sure it's similar to most, right? They don't teach government contracting in school. And so I came out of school and took a job with the federal government, specifically the Office of Inspector General, Department of Transportation. And I pictured myself in marble buildings working with the federal government. Didn't necessarily go that way. And there was an opportunity with a company who was doing government contracting consulting. I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded good to do. They liked my government experience. And so I jumped in, and then ever since then, just sort of learning the nuances of government contracting. And what's really nice about that is I didn't know if I wanted to be an accountant or a lawyer going to school. So I ended up doing neither by trade, but I get to play both every day in terms of regulatory compliance and cost accounting. So it's sort of a perfect match at the end of the day, the way it worked out. So.
Oh, wow. That is really cool. So what exactly was your major then?
I was finance. And then, Master's of Accountancy, sort of as I got into the government contracting space to make sure I, had the debits and credit side down as well.
Okay. So what do you like about working in the GovCon space?
Yeah, the GovCon space is interesting because you touch everything, right? People think government contracting and they think major DoD prime contractors, but what you miss is, there's the life science companies that are doing vaccines and research and development. You have the nonprofits who are doing aid and development work internationally. You have industrial companies that are feeding up to the primes, right? So you kind of get to see all aspects of the ecosystem of the American economy. And it really just gives you a lens into those businesses and sort of, the overall workings and interconnectedness of all of it.
That's a great way to think about it. How it's all interconnected. Yes, we sit back as taxpayers and we watch, well, what are you doing with our money, right? But being in the space that you're in, you're actually getting to see the details of how it all comes to be. So I love that answer. So with you all focusing on middle market, we know that small businesses, like I said earlier, that they have some perks, right? That the government kind of helps to handhold and help them along their journey. And it's interesting because recently we have been having quite a bit of discussions about what is happening to the small businesses that find themselves in limbo one day when they wake up and they're no longer small. I'm actually meeting with someone that is working on this front here next week for us to talk about this. Like, how can we continue to help these companies? What do we do, right? What is she currently doing? I know Sammy, the Society of American Military Engineers, their conference last year, they actually held a session just to deal with this. So it's a great topic. So what are some of the issues, right? Again, they're no longer small, but they're too small to be truly large, right? So what are some of the issues they find themselves dealing with when they now flip over to the other side?
Yeah, very interesting and not uncommon, right? So even for us as RSM, right, fifth largest accounting firm nationally, but we don't want to be big four. We focus on the middle market. So we get this all the time, right? Where you have these companies that are graduating from the small business set aside, and then, they're sort of, what do I do now, right? And where it gets really tricky is it's the government support and the government resources that I think people don't understand what happens, right? In the small business, the government is trying to support them. They're trying to stand them up. They're trying to help them get through certain things. Then you flip and it becomes now we're going to come in and do these compliance audits and we need to make sure you have it all right. And the company is just not used to that level of, rigor from the government in terms of what they're looking for and how to get there. So it's almost like you go from small to we're going to treat you just like everybody else. And so it gets a little bit tricky for folks trying to bridge that gap and not understand that the lens from the government has changed at that point, and the way you need to operate is going to be a little bit different.
Okay. So what are some of the things specifically, if you can elaborate a little bit, that, okay, you flip, let's say, okay, you wake up today, you flip tomorrow, right? And then what? So what should be your priority? Like, I need to make sure that we have X, Y, Z in place. We need to really be looking at, well, hopefully they're doing this before, right? Even as a small business.
Right.
So let's back up there. Yes. So hopefully they're doing those things before. But like you said, maybe they're more relaxed with it. Well, here comes tomorrow and things change. So what are some of the things they really, really should be focused on?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the good examples, and this is, it gets a little technical from the compliance end of things, but, cost accounting standards, right? That's a big one where you're just exempt all day, every day as a small business. You don't even need to think about it. As you start progressing out of there, you need to start tracking and making sure that, you have an understanding of where you're progressing towards, right? In terms of being subject to cost accounting standards, do we need a disclosure statement, things like that. So that level of rigor and compliance, it starts coming into view, and you need to make sure that you're aware of it so you can track it appropriately, as opposed to waking up one day after you're a small business, you've gone through all this and you say, guys, we might be cast covered. We got to go figure out when this happened. Did we have a trigger contract? What does that look like? So again, instead of trying to unwind it, really understanding what you're looking for going forward and having that plan in place. And like you said, a lot of that should be, right, as you're graduating, let's make sure we understand what that next step in the journey is. And do we have a way to kind of keep ourselves on track there?
Okay, so you just used a term. You said cast cover.
Yeah, so cost accounting standards.
Oh, okay, cost. Okay, well, for the sake of our audience, we'll see if we can help navigate the acronyms. So cast cover. Okay, cost accounting standards. Alrighty, great, got it. The people that's playing in the world, they probably understand the term. So.
Okay. Yeah, and again, that's just another level of scrutiny that you'll get at in terms of some of the contracts that you would be going after.
And who's scrutinizing them?
So it's going to come from different aspects of the government. Typically, it's a DCAA function, right? So Defense Contract Audit Agency. They sort of set the bar for what they'll be reviewing from that standpoint. What you start to see is in proposals that you're submitting, right? Particularly cost type or those that are, sole source in nature, right? On the fixed price side, is a requirement to submit a disclosure statement or to make some assessment or determination in terms of if you're cast covered or not. So it starts becoming at the proposal stage, the government's going to start asking questions and saying, hey, this may throw you into a new world, right? Cast
Mm.
coverage, cost accounting standards. Give us your response, give us your disclosed accounting practices. Let us know how you plan to handle this. And the company just has to be prepared to be able to answer that. So in a lot of aspects, it is at that proposal stage where getting new work that's not small business set aside requires these extra responses.
So what's the difference, I guess, with the cost accounting standards that they all of a sudden need to make sure they're doing versus what they were doing before to be DCAA compliant anyway?
Yeah, so a lot of it is innate, right, in terms of the accounting requirements that you would expect. But what ends up happening is, again, there's more scrutiny behind it, right? Mm-hmm. There's more administration, which is really what becomes more complicated. You have to communicate more consistently with the government if you plan to change the way you're doing any of your cost accounting practices. So there's a heads up, there's government sign off, right? Sign off's the wrong word, but there's some acknowledgement, right? You're making these decisions sort of with the government and giving the heads up, and they're kind of determining with you what they're willing or open to having you change. And again, that's as you grow into full cast coverage. There's different steps to it. You know, there's a whole process in making some of these determinations, but the administration is really what kind of throws people off. You just have to be ahead of the game and you have to have things organized. And consistency is the key to the game, right?
Okay, yeah. What are some of the things that you see, you know, like the stresses you think of that your clients are going through on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, from a middle market standpoint, yeah, a lot of what we're seeing and feeling out there is sort of the confusion, if you will, between the government and what they're looking to buy and how they're looking to buy, and some of the requirements that we're seeing land in these contracts, right? And so what I mean by that is, you know, if you think about the national defense strategy that just got released recently, right? Talking about the need and the want to bring in commercial contractors and access, you know, non-traditional defense contractors and all of this, which sounds great, right? And we want to bring people in who are, you know, smaller businesses, middle market, who have great technologies and the ability to help DoD further its mission. But what ends up happening is when you get down to the procurement side and the contract side, you start seeing these traditional DoD clauses that just make fundamentally the way these businesses have to operate different and more challenging, and they don't know what to do with it, right? And so that disconnect and that confusion has been making it challenging for a lot of our clients. Again, we're seeing things where they say, but the government really wants this product. We want to do it. We want to help. We want to do all, you know, these things for them. And they don't realize that the clauses that are in their contract and the things that could come down the pike 2 or 3 years later from an audit standpoint. And so not understanding what the clauses mean, not understanding where they can push back and where they should based off of, you know, how they plan to engage with the government. Those are a lot of things that these, you know, graduating small businesses need to be educated on and make sure that they have, you know, some understanding of so they can communicate appropriately with their government customers. And even their prime customers, right? If they're not going directly with the government, same concept.
So it boils down to a lot of education.
A lot of education, a lot of understanding, and reading the letter of the requirements or the contract clauses. There's always context behind those, right? In terms of the spirit of the regulation and what should be applied.
So let me ask you a clarifying question. When we said mid-market, right, typically we know with the size standards, it's different per NAICS code, right? And for those who are listening and don't know what a NAICS code is, it's 6 digits that you pretty much are categorizing your industry within. And that determines, you know, if you make so much over this amount over the course of 5 years, then we will consider you large, right? So you have to stay within this group. So isn't that the clients that you do have? So let's say, for example, with construction 236220, general construction, 45 million is the current size standard. So over 5 years. So once they hit that, okay, you automatically go to mid-market large, right? So isn't that's the type of revenue you're seeing that your clients are coming to you with, or are they much larger in that sense?
Yeah, I would say where we say middle market and where we see the complications of government contracting really start is sort of that, we call it like that 50 million, almost up to $1 billion, right? I mean, that's sort of
Okay.
the area where we find folks who start to struggle with these concepts. Not to say that folks early on, wouldn't have similar issues, but that's generally where we start seeing that go.
Okay, great. So you said 50 million to a billion,
Yeah.
and a billion is considered mid-market.
Billions considered mid-market because when you think about in the
Wow.
government contracting space, the size and the complexity of, think traditional government contractors and these massive weapon systems, right? You're talking
Right.
$100 billions
$1 billion.
of companies, right? So, so that is sort of, the billion, yeah, it's probably on the higher end, but they still, they're struggling with the same things as the other middle market companies in terms of resources, right? The ability to invest in technology and back office systems and having the right support around. So, it's scalable, but the problems tend to be the same.
Interesting. Okay. You would think a company that's making $1 billion have it figured out, right? Versus the guy that's the 50 million.
Yeah, it's a lot. The problems get bigger and harder and more expensive to solve from a back office standpoint. So
now that is a good point. That is true. So what is some of maybe the staff members they should be even having on the team at this point? Or should they keep, is it that it's better to have the accounting outsourced to a firm like yours, or do they have to have an accountant on, like who they have on team at this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because what you see is part of that scalability that we talked about from 50 to a billion, right? It's almost like that compliance department, if you will. So when you see it in the smaller side, maybe you have a director of finance and accounting who has government contracting experience, knows the cost principles, knows things of that nature. And then it starts building out. Now you need, contracts folks who truly understand, what the clauses are coming down, or how to brief a contract, what we need to think about or push back on, right, from a legal perspective. And then as you start growing, you see pure compliance folks, people who understand and know how to liaison with DCA and those routine audits that you're going to start seeing more of, right? So you kind of start building your team and your staff with the skill set of the underlying government contracting expertise, right, in their individual departments, and then sort of roll it all up into a compliance department that starts to build out.
Okay, that's a great point. So are most of the clients you have or you tend to see, are they really, really focused only GovCon, or do they have a mix of commercial and GovCon?
Most are a mix of commercial and GovCon, and that becomes a strategic conversation for them as well, right? And it becomes what is the difference, right? If you're 99% GovCon, 1% commercial, that's great. You have some commercial activity, but you're probably operating like a government contractor, right? When you start getting into that 50-50 mix, you start looking at it and say, man, these government contracting regulations and rules are really hard. Should I really make the other half of the business follow all of those things, right? And so the simplest one is timekeeping, right? Do we really need people to keep time on a daily basis, total time accounting on the commercial side? Or, is that something that we only have the government folks focus on? And so you start seeing that strategic thought come into play. When do I totally separate the businesses, have them do separate things, right? From a control, from a process, from a recording perspective. And when do I keep them together for efficiencies? So there's always that push and pull between protect the commercial business from government audits, but also what's the best way to make sure that we, get the best use of our resources, we stay efficient internally, and we have ways to, kind of operate at a scalable level.
That kind of reminds me of the whole CMMC conversation, right? It's like, if you're doing both, you still have to be protected. Like, how do you shelter the commercial piece with the compliance on the CMMC for the government piece? And I was listening, I did a training, and that's part of some of the strategy they were talking about, like, okay, how you encapsulate this to keep it really tight, because you still have to be compliant here. And so, there's so many nuances that companies have to deal with, especially if they're doing both. So,
and that's a fascinating conversation. So we actually have a whole team that is like we're the largest third-party assessor for CMMC, and we have a whole team. And so our teams typically link up in that conversation, right? How are we going to structure this business now that you're getting these major government contracts, or you already have them, now you're applying CMMC? Are we going to lock the whole business down? Are people going to be able to work like that? Do we separate them? Who's touching CUI, who isn't, right? So all those things go hand in hand in terms of your IT strategy, your cost structure, your organizational structure, all those things we think about and put together. And what complicates it even more is the government application of those rules, or misapplication, depending on how you look at it, right? And so really understanding what you think is going to be coming in your door that needs to be protected or segregated, versus, what's actually going to happen when the government starts stamping things.
Yes. Okay. So that's great to know that you guys, so you're the largest third party. Okay. That is good information to know, because look, I'm thinking about some companies already that we support that, needs to think through that mix of commercial and GovCon, and really how they set up to make it compliant.
Yeah.
So that's great how you guys can look at it from a holistic point of view versus just the lens of CMMC or just the lens of your accounting. But you can look at it as a total package to really make things secure.
Right. And especially when you think about from like an indirect rate or a cost recovery perspective, right? That's expensive to get through CMMC. And so what's the government's, fair burden on that we should be expecting them to help pay for? So a lot of conversations around that, and how do you separate it out? Can you separate it out, and what makes sense? So very, very strategic at the outset. Like you said, as opposed to just diving in and saying, well, let's solve for CMMC, and then, all the other tales of it, come out after the fact.
Yes. And that's going to be more costly, more time, right? And you could potentially be out of compliance again, and you don't even realize it. So, man, so many pieces to this. How exciting is this world of GovCon, right? Maybe some may not think of it that much exciting, but it definitely keeps you on your toes, right? So back to the small business transition and so forth. So do you think Congress should even get involved in, how do we help the middle market? I know I was talking to someone earlier this week, actually, again, and they mentioned that, I believe back in the 80s, Congress was looking at working with the middle markets and like creating a designation or something for them, so it can help them not truly be large, right? So what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. It's tough because, again, you have to juggle the taxpayer side of things, right? We want to make sure our money's going to the right place. We want to make sure there's controls and reasonableness around what's happening. But I don't think that the government is relying enough on the commercial market and the things that have already been established and are good, normal business practices. So I don't know if I would go as far as to say a separate designation, but I think, exactly what they're doing now. They're considering, I think there's a pilot program, right? Should everything be commercial until we determine it's not commercial? Versus right now, the way the government buys is everything's not commercial unless you can prove to me that it is, right? And so I think looking at it from a different lens of saying, how do we access that commercial market? How do we leverage good, sound business practices from other standards that are accepted, domestically, internationally, whatever it is? I think that's the lens that I would expect Congress to start, getting the procurement process more up to speed on, where right now I feel like there's a total disconnect between what the government wants and how they actually execute it in terms of contracting and buying.
Which again goes back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago with the DoD, this whole strategy. So let's talk a little bit about that strategy. And we were talking offline, and I was telling you about our example, right? Just like, okay, we need larger companies, we need a bigger industry base. But then when you bring the companies to them and you're having your capabilities briefing and you're discussing, and they look at, well, you have no past performance with DoD. Oh, we can't look at you. We're not gonna hire. We can't contract you, because why would I? Because you don't understand how to work with us. Well, hold on. Have you looked at our, again, experience over the last 30 years? Like, okay, so there is a big disconnect, right? And so what's your thoughts now about the plan? Like, what should they really be doing? Have you read the fact sheet? I started looking at the fact sheet, but
Yeah. I mean, I think, of course, the government never moves as fast as you want, but I think that pilot program is a great idea. And I think we will get some good information out of that. The
Okay.
trick is always how do they act, right? And how does it get implemented and what do we do with it? Part of it becomes the RFP templates, right? What ends up happening is the folks who release those are just using the RFP template they know how to use,
Templates.
right? And they're buying the way that they know how to buy. So
Yeah.
there's a training component and, a little bit of relief to those folks too, in terms of our expectation is that you do go more commercial. Let's use these types of terms, right? Let's take away things like past performance as a key evaluator in the proposal process if we are reaching out to the commercial market. Right now, if you're doing a pure weapon systems and people need to deliver in and all of that, that's probably a different conversation. But if there are other things that the government buys that the commercial market should be able to support. So I think training is going to be a big training of the procurement officers and the buyers and the contracting officers. I think is going to be is really what needs to happen.
Yes, that, and then also getting, again, one of our clients that we support, they do a certain type of construction technology that can help move things faster, cheaper. We do it, every day in the commercial world. And I have spoken to so many people, engineering, whether they were on the USACE side, the Air Force side. I'm like, trying to who creates the standards that we can talk to from the commercial side and to bring this to say, have y'all ever looked at these? Right? You want things cheaper, you want things faster, right? And you want, of course, they are safe, right? We could talk about those safety standards. But who can we even talk to? It's not, that's even one side of it. It's like how we can help to bridge the gap and bring more of the commercial technology to the government space. Because again, like they told me, and multiple of them told me this, well, we have our standard, our handbook that we go by. I'm like, yes. And I want to talk to somebody about who creates those standards. So who's at least looking over them and considering, oh, maybe we can update these things. Like who does that, right? So even, not just even the procurement side, but even in their engineering side and other things, I'm sure there's other pieces that can we have conversations to help you guys be better?
Yeah. Yeah, the technical delivery side for sure. And again, there's a difference between putting a part in a, space shuttle that has to go up and deal with that versus, some of the other things that the government is buying. And I think, I think we've seen some success, particularly in the life science side, right? Some of the research, some of the manufacturing, right? Those standards are sort of set in terms of what the medical market looks for, the pharmaceutical market.
Yes.
But they still get applied all these extra business requirements, right? That kind of slow them down or make them not want to get involved with the government. So those are the areas that I think construction is probably another good one, right? Some of the manufacturing sides for less DoD weapon systems, I think are areas that they should be looking at for sure.
Yes. And so that's great. So maybe we could, maybe those are things we have to keep plowing our fields, right? Keep plowing the fields and keep talking to whoever would listen. And maybe eventually, we'll see some changes.
Yeah, the positive is, the rhetoric from the top, right, and what we're seeing in, some of the executive orders, some of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, there are things that they are asking for. So I think now it's got to trickle down, right, to the actual implementation and execution of it.
Yes. Okay. And that is true. And we know sometimes that can take years to trickle down. So, sometimes you're like, I'm not holding my breath until, for example, the latest project labor agreement, the PLAs, about the PLAs that have been, it's been an executive order to, if you are constructing anything that's over $35 million, you now have to have these project labor agreements. And so that's a big game changer, even, from bringing a commercial company into to help on the Govcon side. It changes the way the people play in that field. And so, in speaking to, like Army Corps, they're still waiting to even see how it's going to be trickled down to them, exactly how we need to implement that. But I know we've already received, hey, this now is what's coming down the pipe. Would you guys want to still even continue being considered for these opportunities? because that changes. It's a big change in cost of projects and so forth.
Yeah, cost reporting, right? Different
Yes.
things that you have to now track that you weren't used to tracking before. So yeah, there's a big it's just a change. Again, you're changing fundamentally the way that businesses need to operate.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So with that, with these companies, again, they're growing, right? They're growing. I know that there a lot of M&A happening, right, going on these days with larger companies buying the smaller companies. So some of the middle market companies, like how can they position themselves if one day they're like, hey, our exit strategy is to be purchased.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is understanding what the buyer is going to be looking for, right, in a diligence process. So, kind of having your house in order, documentation wise, again, depending on the types of contracts you have, and who you're looking at, who potentially would be targeting you, right, making sure that you have a way to show them that, yeah, we've done this the right way. There's nothing that you're going to be on the hook for here, right, that we may have broken. And then also, being in the market to where if you're getting off, you're no longer going to have access to those set aside dollars, right?
Mhm.
How is your business ready and able to compete, right, in a full and open environment?
So what are some of the things maybe they should be speaking to you guys about, companies like yours, because they're going to need the strategy, they'll need support.
Yeah, and I think that, again, the strategy is a big part of it, right? Where are you going in the future?
Right.
Not just from one potentially having a sale happen, right? But also, what is it that you're doing in your business that you think you want to continue to pursue, or that a target company would be able to pursue if they were able to give you more resources and build off of that, right? And so, contract types, contract pricing, processes from an efficiency standpoint to make sure that, again, the back office is in order and we have a good way to handle, future scalability. So I think starting with that strategy conversation and then really laying out a game plan over a short and a midterm to get to what you're trying to achieve, I think is key.
Okay, good. So how do you counsel your clients to help them be competitive against the large businesses when you're in a pool together? We're all in the same pool, right? And we're competing now. Does your clients come to you guys for advice on, how do I price my unit, price whatever they're, working on to stay competitive?
Yeah. So again, a lot of that is very strategic in terms of the business, right? And I hate to always give the consulting answer if it depends, but it always depends, right? And so we work with companies a lot, particularly, when you're thinking about cost reimbursable contracts and either staying competitive or, hey, we have something really good. And the evaluation criteria is not just on price, it's on value, right? And so understanding where absorption of costs can happen within the bounds of compliance, but hey, this one we kind of need to be pretty low here because we know what that competitive market is versus maybe this type of product or this service that we're offering, we have a higher technical ability, right? And so really thinking about the push and pull from a lever standpoint, again, staying within the bounds of compliance, but being able to understand where the actual cost allocation should go and how that pricing should look from a proposal standpoint. So, modeling those things out is important. It takes time, and there's strategic decisions that you want to make along the way as you start seeing the math happen between the different alternatives, how you can price things and how you can think about, that internal structure, if you will.
So is that a common service that companies come to, companies like yours to assist them with? Like,
Yeah,
hey, we're looking at these types of proposals.
It is, yeah. And especially, when you start thinking about the competitive side, right? People think about wrap rates and where do I need to, what's my target rate versus where I actually am. And part of that too is, you'll see companies that are growing, they're making strategic pricing decisions, but in some cases they're kind of, it's kind of cut your nose to spite your face, right? Where you're removing costs that maybe could be recoverable if you had it in a different way or in a different manner. Or you're cutting, your assumption on inflation, which is wrong, but you're going to be willing to eat it, versus looking at some of the end the fee and the profit that you're putting in there as well. So there's different levers that you could pull as you're thinking about your pricing strategy, that you want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in a box and you really are being strategic in terms of, how you're getting in there. Another example would be, are you getting into a new market and you just want to get your foot in the door? That's a different pricing conversation than saying we own this market, we're trying to protect it, right? So there's just different lenses that you want to take into consideration as you're, pulling those levers that I mentioned.
So you mentioned inflation for a second there. So with the higher inflation, I mean, I know it's come down. I think as of November, we're at about 2.5%. And they're saying they want to be able to get to 2%, but it could be years, like not till I think they said 2026 potentially to get to even to 2%. So how is that affecting your clients or this middle market?
Yeah, so particularly on the fixed price contractor side, right? They're getting hit a lot with this inflation piece of it.
Yeah.
They have historic contracts that have been priced the way they were, where inflation was low. All of a sudden, it ramped up, and they're saying, "I'm getting crushed on these contracts." There's a couple of different things that we found. I mean, one is going back and looking, do you have an economic price adjustment clause in those contracts? Is there something you could bring to bear? Again, different agencies have had a different approach to it. I feel like GSA has been a little bit kinder in terms of, yeah, we're willing to work with you. DOD's been a little bit more, nah, you kind of priced it the way you did, you're done. But it's something to bring a conversation forth with, right? And if they'd be willing to entertain it. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of folks do is really recognize the importance of that economic price adjustment clause in their contracts and say, listen, I don't know where this is going. I want that in there now.
Yes.
Make sure that we have that so we have relief should we need it down the line. But like you said, so inflation really spiked up there from people getting nervous, people feeling like they need to address it, right? So not just the number of inflation, but the activity around it and the buzz spiked up for a bit there. But now it's starting to calm down a little bit where, people feel like the new contracts they're pricing kind of have something that will be steady away. Yeah, again, we did see a lot of fixed price contracts that were priced with really low inflation and the contractors were taking the brunt of that. So.
All right. Well, good. So we are hopefully we're, like you said, it's kind of steadying out now where, okay, those who had the contracts and was not prepared for it, kind of, hopefully they got some help and relief with their adjustments. And then now where we're at currently, everybody's used to it almost. So, the procurement team is helping in that. I know that we're looking at some contracts and they've had they've had a couple incremental increases already in the budget. And then when they released the RFP, the magnitude is now 2 to 5 times higher than what the budget is. And so I'm trying to find out where's the money coming from? Do you all have this money? Because I know what you budgeted.
Yeah.
But now you're telling me it could be potentially 5 times as much.
Yeah, well, and that's the hard part for the small and middle market, right? The larger you stay in the game long enough, right? That at some point you're going to price something with higher inflation, it'll come down and you'll reap the benefits and you kind of make yourself whole. But for the smaller and the mid guys, you have to be able to withstand that, right? From a cash flow perspective and be able to manage. So again, having those outlets within your contract to allow you to have that conversation. The other thing we've seen too is, the indexes that folks use, like, when inflation was low, it's kind of like, we'll just use CPI and we'll move with it, right? Now people are starting to look and saying, well, do I need something different for this type of material? Do I need something different for my labor, right? And so trying to get really, really granular in the indexes that you're using to price inflation so you can substantiate your pricing to the government.
Okay, good. All right. Well, everyone is very much on hyper mode and understand cost is, everything is more expensive. So they are working accordingly. So right now, I mean, we're almost at time we can start wrapping up here. But how should companies keep up with all the policy changes? Like, what's some of the recommendations you would even provide for them? It's like, there's things happen so fast.
Yeah, things do happen fast. Obviously, access to thought leadership, right? Make sure that you're, kind of looking around. There's a lot of good articles that are put out there, by us as RSM and the accounting firms. There's also the law firms that will give you some good content. Industry events, I would always say, make sure you're plugged in with your local industry chapters, whether that's NDIA, NCMA, those types of areas. And then just peer-to-peer. I think, being part of roundtables, that's something that we try to put together for our clients too, right? Like, let's just get peer-to-peer together so people are talking. Yes, we see things from our perspective, right? And we, different clients across different industries, but there's nothing better than peer-to-peer talking, saying, I'm dealing with this, how are you dealing with it? And just sharing some stories from that perspective. So the more that we can get industry talking, I think the better. The more you share stories, the more you can kind of have an understanding of where others' positions kind of are, again, taking the competitive side of it out, of course.
Yes.
The other thing that we're trying to do too, and even working with NCMA on this a little bit, is get government and industry talking.
Yes.
Right? Let's have honest conversations about these things. And, when we do that, you tend to have a little bit of holdback from industry because of their government customers. But let's have the open dialogue. Let's talk about the pain points. Let's talk about the things we're struggling with and see if government can't help us.
Okay, that's great. Any other, maybe, I know you mentioned a couple memberships or places that they can go to keep up with accounting, but is there any other types of events? So, networking groups that you can think of that would be a good place for these types of companies to get together?
Yeah, I think those are probably the big national ones. I know for some of the folks in the DC metro area, which is kind of the GovCon hub, if you will, we have things like CFO Rising, where, people who are looking to get into a CFO role or really working in the back office can get exposure. And again, more peer-to-peer, right? Talking about things that are happening there. We'll have industry CFOs present. We'll have, legal, we'll have compliance representatives discuss. But again, very informational, very, hands-on session trainings type stuff. So CFO Rising is another good one as well.
All righty. Well, is there anything else you can think of that maybe we didn't touch base that would help the audience as they're listening in our conversation?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, right, it's read the contract. I think that's something that people miss because that really tells you what you're going to be obligated to do and what you need to follow. So, read the contract, read it again, make sure you understand what's in there. Understand where you can push back. But otherwise, I appreciate the time. I think that, great conversation, a little bit of a GovCon nerd out for me. So appreciate you bearing with me on some of those things. But yeah, this is it's a good conversation. And I think the more we can have these, the more we can share information, I think, the more we'll push the industry forward in the GovCon ecosystem.
Well, thank you so much, Giacomo, for coming on the GovCon podcast. We really appreciate your time because I know it's very valuable. You've got a lot going on and you took a few minutes to be with us today. So thanks for the valuable information also that you shared. And I'm hopeful that our audience would have gained something and maybe they'll even reach out if that's possible. They can reach out to you or to your team at RSM.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate the time. Look forward to talking more.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. All right, bye.